So what I'd like to do now is just talk about the first verse of the Torah, and then after we talk about the first verse of Parshas Mishpatim, and then after we talk about that, maybe we could talk about the Hebrew slave, which is right here at the beginning, and then we'll talk about the Canaanite slave. But first, I want to, since David was talking about the first verse, Ve-eleh Hamishpatim asher tasim lifneihem, I'd like to cite basically. Let's just see how many Gemaras we could cite. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 Gemaras that refer to this verse that are in this sefer that we started studying by Rav Stern. This incredibly brilliant sefer, which I'm falling in love with. So the first idea, it says these are the laws, and the Gemara or the Tanhuma talks about the connection between the end of the previous verse, which states "Lo taleh b'malot," says you're not allowed to have steps going up onto the altar, and then it says "Ve-eleh Hamishpatim," and then it says these are the laws. So asks the Tanhuma, Minah. So from where do we know this idea that the rabbi said that a judge needs to be deliberate in judgment? So the law is, because it says you shall lo taleh b'malot, because it says these two verses are next to each other. You should not walk up on steps, and right next to it says these are the laws. Meaning to say, and we learned, what does it mean that you cannot walk up steps to the altar? So you don't reveal the nakedness of the Kohen. So because the altar's ramp would see the Kohen's, the steps would see the Kohen's legs if he's walking up steps. But the Tanhuma says, why would the Kohen be naked? He was wearing breeches underneath his robe. So it's to tell you that God is warning us with these verses, Shelo yivsu psios gatzos b'mikdash. Kach yisiras hadayanim shelo yivsu psios gatzos b'din. So the connection is, this is such a powerful Tanhuma, that why does it say you can't have steps in the altar? And right next to that, it says these are the laws. Because it's to tell us that steps refers to arrogance, that was called psios gasos, large, arrogant steps. And we're being warned that in these two areas, a person has to take small steps, deliberate steps. The person has to carry himself with humility. That the Kohanim, in the service of the temple, God forbid, they might carry themselves with arrogance because they think that they're invested with such spiritual authority. People will look up to them with such respect. So they have to be careful to not carry themselves with arrogance. And also judges, they also might be carrying themselves with arrogance. So in these two areas, they need to conduct themselves with tremendous humility. Rav Stern adds to this midrash by saying that Rashi, in his commentary to Sanhedrin, writes, 7a, writes, what does it mean to be deliberate in judgment? That the judges have an obligation to look very carefully at a law before they give their ruling. And Rabbeinu Yonah, in his commentary to Pirkei Avot, writes that the judges shouldn't assume that their first thought about something is correct, but rather they have to give it a lot of thought and analysis. And Rav Yitzchak Karo explains that this this applies not only to the judges, but also the scribes in the court and everybody who's in the court, that they need to look at everything very carefully before recording something. Another law that relates to this is that the judge was not allowed to walk above the heads of the people. So the way it used to be was that when somebody gave a drasha, or taught a class, they didn't have chairs like we have today. And we go to Costco, buy a chair for $20. So everybody was sitting on the floor, and the one who walked amongst them would be like he was walking over their heads. So therefore, they had to be careful that the judge or the rabbi who was giving the drasha, he was supposed to get to the room, the Beis Medrash, before the people came. because otherwise it would either look like he's walking above their heads, or else they would have to stand up to honor him. The judge or the rabbis, they need to go out of their way to carry themselves with humility. That's the teaching here. Okay, that's the first teaching of the 7 that we said we're going to share from that Rav Stern brought down. The second one is from the Mechilta. Ve-eleh Hamishpatim. Rabbi Shimon taught, why were these laws written down before all the mitzvahs of the Torah? Meaning to say, we're seeing all these laws before the laws of Mishpatim, before the laws of the Karbanos, before the laws of Shemitah, before the laws of the Chagim. Why are we getting all of these laws, the civil laws, before all the laws that are uniquely Jewish? So Mara Udin and Likdom call mitzvah Shabbatorah. So the answer is that when there's judgment between a person and his friend, when there's a case, when there's a civil matter, there's a fight between them. But once the matter is ruled, then they can have peace. So we see from here that in order for there to be the rest of the laws of the Torah, we first have to have peace amongst the Jewish people. That's the Mechilta. So Rav Stern brings down from the Tanchuma to Mishpatim that there was an incident with Rabbi Asi. When Rabbi Asi was getting ready to leave the world, when he was getting ready to die, his nephew, his sister's son, comes in, and he found her, and they found him crying. They found Rabbi Asi crying. They say, why are you crying? Is there any Torah you didn't study? You studied everything. Your students are sitting before you. Is there any kindness that you haven't done? You've done everything. So he writes, for this I'm crying, that maybe, so he says, for this I'm crying. This is why I'm crying, that, excuse me, so they said one more sentence. They said, and on all the things, you didn't even allow yourself to become appointed as a communal leader. So they said to him, so he says, this is why I'm crying. Maybe I'm going to pay my judgment before God because I could have been a good judge for them and I didn't. So that was why he was crying. Okay, so now the next verse comes from, the next Gemara that he cites comes from Eruvin 54b. It says, these are the laws you shall place before them. So it says the Gemara in Eruvin 54b, Rabbi Akiva taught, Minayin shechayev adam l'shanos l'talmido ad sheyom adenu. From where do we know that a person is obligated to teach a student until a student learns? It says, V'lamda es b'nei Yisrael, Minayin ad shetei sedura b'fihim. How do we know that he needs to teach them until the Torah is arranged in their laws? As it says, Stima b'fihem. Place it in their mouths. Minayin shechayev haros lo panim. And how do we know you have to show him respect? It says, Ve-eleh Hamishpatim asher or what does it mean, haros lo panim? So it doesn't really, usually it means to show him respect, but that's not what it's going to mean here. He doesn't answer, but that's what the Gemara in Eruvin says. So his teacher has to show favor to his students. What does that mean? When a teacher teaches the laws, he has to show favor to his students. It's based upon the fact that it says, Ve-eleh Hamishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. So Rav Stern explains that this means, Laros lo panim, he has to teach him the reasoning for the matters. And he can't say, that's what I heard. But rather, he has to go out of his way to try and understand it and explain the reasoning before it. And this is what it says in Gemara Tainus. If you see a student that he's not understanding, it's because he had a bad teacher who didn't explain to him the reasoning. That's harsh. But I can promise you this is true, that I don't know if it's always true, but it's often true that that if you don't love a subject, it's because you had a bad teacher in that area specifically. And that this is what Professor Chaim Soloveitchik told me. There's no such thing as a boring topic, only boring teachers. So therefore, it's the teacher's responsibility to share the Torah in a way to make it interesting for the students. Okay, the next one. This is the fourth of the sound. By the way, I hope I'm doing a good job of making it interesting and I'm not boring everybody. If so, that's my fault. I apologize. So it says, these are the laws that you shall place before them. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, why does it say you shall place? It should say, Asher Tulamdim, that you shall teach them. So what does this mean? So it means, says Reb Yirmiyah Vitem Reb Chia Bar Abba, Elu Klei Adayanim. These are the utensils or the tools, the instruments of the judges. What does that mean? Rav Huna ki having nafakodina. When he went out to give a judgment, he would say, "Bring out for me the stick, the strap, the shofar, and the sandala." Meaning to say, I need my tools to enforce my judgment. So, but the interesting thing is, the Rav Shtor notes is that the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam don't record this teaching from the Talmud as a law that a judge needs to have a stick next to him. And he also, and the Sma writes, I haven't seen people careful about this. So they don't do this anymore. All right, fine. Next one is Baba Kama. We had this already. Wow. You're going to hear something now incredibly controversial. I can't believe he's even putting this down in his sefer. He probably we'll see what he says. Everybody pay attention now. You should have been paying attention the whole time. Wait for this one. It says, Ve-eleh Hamishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. This is, says the Gemara Mishnah Baba Kama, Nashim b'klal hanezek. That women are included in damages. So meaning to say that if you damage a woman, you have to pay damages, just like if you damage a man. So what's the source for this? So Tevei Rebbe Eliezer Tani Ve-eleh Hamishpatim asher tisem lifneihem. These are the laws you shall place before them. Hishva kosav isha leish l'kol dinan shebetorah. That a man is compared to a woman for all the laws of the Torah, meaning to say that just like all these laws of simul damages apply to a man, they apply equally to a woman. But now he writes as follows. So this is what Rav Shtor says. Not everybody agrees with this, but he writes, a woman is not allowed to be a dayan, to be the judge in a bet din, in a court. And this is what the Shulchan Aruch says. The reason is whoever is kosher to be a judge is kosher to be a witness. And since a woman is not allowed to be a witness, she's also not allowed to be a judge. If that's the case, how was Devorah? How did she judge Israel? How was Devorah a judge? So Tosfos explains that they accepted her upon themselves. That means to say, generally speaking, a woman is disqualified, but Devorah was a judge on monetary matters because monetary matters, even a relative or somebody who's disqualified is allowed to be a judge if they accept it upon themselves. However, just let me finish this, but Tosfos in Tractate Nida writes that Devorah had a different reason why she was able to be a judge, because she had special divine providence. The Aruch LaNer writes that these two explanations are hinted to in the verse, Devorah Eishes Neviah Eishes Lapidot, that Devorah was Isha Neviah, was a woman who was a prophetess. She was a fiery woman, and she judged Israel, or Eishes Lapidot, the wife of Lapidot, she judged Israel at that time. So we see from here that a prophet, this is based upon the Gemara, that a prophet can override the words of the Torah through prophecy. But it's just for that one moment and not for all generations. So she judged, but another woman is not able to judge because she could do it because she was a Neviah. And that was only at that time. And so And so therefore they went up to her for judgment, but not to anybody else. I will say this, the Sefer Chinuch does record the possibility of a woman being a judge. But this is what I wanted to share with you. He writes, however, in the Shut Marshal, that it's brought down about his grandmother, the Rabbanit Marat Miriam, that she was the Rosh Yeshiva for many days, and she sat there teaching with a mechitza in front of her, and she said the halacha before many boys. So he brings down in the name of the Marshal that a woman could be a Rosh Yeshiva. So a woman, maybe he says she can't be the judge based upon the Shulchan Aruch, but she could be the head of the yeshiva. That's what he writes down here. I was surprised to read that. But anyway, let me pause as there's a question. So we come to the next Gemara, which is cited by Rabbi Stern. And Rabbi Stern writes, what is it? He cites the Brisa from Masechet Gittin. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Kol Makom Shata Motzei Aguriot Shel Ovdei Kochavim. Whenever you find gatherings of idolaters, Afal Pisha Dineim Kedinei Yisrael, even though their laws are like the laws of the Jews, meaning to say you're not allowed to go to the non-Jewish courts. As it states, Ve-eleh Hamishpatim asher tasim lifneihem, these are the laws you shall place before them, but not before the idolaters. So you're not allowed to go to the non-Jewish courts for judgment. This is called the law of the Arkos. Even if they have the exact same laws, you're not allowed to go to the non-Jewish courts. The Rambam writes, whoever goes to the non-Jewish courts for judgment, even though their laws are like the laws of the Jews, this person is a rasha, is a wicked person, and it's as though he's cursing and blaspheming the laws of Moshe. And it says, Ve-eleh Hamishpatim asher tasim lifneihem, that these are the laws you shall place before them, and not before the idolaters. Lifneihem lo lifnei hadyotos. So you're not allowed to go to, even if they're not idolaters, if they're not Jewish, you're not allowed to go to their courts. This law is a biblical law. And even if both parties say, you know what, we want to go to the non-Jewish courts, still not okay, the Rashba says. And even if they have the exact same laws, but meaning to say if their judges are worse, for sure you wouldn't be allowed. So it's even if they have good judges, you're still not allowed. Rabbeinu Machaya writes that this is going to sound extreme. But Rabbeinu Machaya writes that going to non-Jewish courts in some ways is worse than murder and stealing, because it's a desecration of God's name. And so therefore, so he says that one is not allowed to do this. Now, we should say that, of course, we know that many people do go to courts, and that's because if the other person is not willing to go to the Beis Din, then you're allowed to go to the non-Jewish courts. So if the other person refuses to go, if you send them a summons to say, I want to go to a rabbinical court, and the other person refuses to go, then you're allowed to take them to the non-Jewish court. But you first have to try to take them to the Jewish court, and it's only if they refuse that you're allowed to go. Of course, there's some people, it's so obvious that they don't want to go to the Beis Din, then I mean, it's just wasting time, that you could take them to the non-Jewish court. So what does it say? The next Gemara, so we only have two more to share. So, actually, this is the last one that we'll share. What does it mean when it states, Lifneihem? Abaye ashkachel Rav Yosef. So Abaye found Rav Yosef, the Yosef v'kam Me'usei Agite. So Abaye found Rav Yosef. Who was Rav Yosef? Rav Yosef was the Rebbe of Abaye. And they were living in Babylon. And Rav Yosef was the Rosh Yeshiva. And he found that Rav Yosef was sitting and forcing people to give the get. He was forcing them to give their divorce. Amarle, but how could you do it? We're not, the rabbis of Babylon did not feel like they had the authority to force people to do these activities. So we actually had this Gemara recently in Bava Kama as well. It says, how can you force them to do something? Doesn't it say, what does it mean? We learned, Ve-eleh Hamishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. These are the laws you shall place before them. And before them means that you can't place the laws before an idolater. Before them, you can't place it before rabbis who are not ordained. That's called a hediot. And they said, and we are hediotos. So how can you force, take the authority? Where does your authority come from? So Abaye gives this. So Rav Yosef gives this answer, which is astonishing, and is a lot to talk about here. He says, "Anan shlichusayu kavdinan." We here in Babylon, we are the agents of the rabbis of the land of Israel. Meaning, say, even though we're not ordained, we're acting as their agents. We have taken the authority from them. So he said, I have the ability to force a man to divorce his wife because they gave us permission. The rabbinical courts of Israel gave us permission. And so that's where the authority comes from. So once we take that, then all of a sudden we have a very expansive authority. So we have this very expansive authority, and the Gemara in Bava Kama also discussed this. This is the idea of anan shichusayu kavdina, and so therefore we have this idea, this concept. I guess that's the irony. On the one hand, they're saying that we start off the discussion from Rav Stern by saying that the rabbis don't have the authority, that the rabbis have to act with humility and should not be walking above the people. But then Rav Stern comes back to say, yes, even though we have to carry ourselves with humility and there's a limitation on our authority, nevertheless, we do have authority because we are the agents of the courts of Israel. And they had tremendous authority. And so therefore, just by acting as their agents, we're going to give ourselves agents to conduct ourselves. So today we no longer live in a society where we can really have that type of latitude, even in Israel, but still, in a theoretical level, every rabbinical court that accepts upon itself to be a steward of the laws of Hashem draws its authority by saying we're just serving as the agents of the courts from the land of Israel, which were ordained properly. Okay, so this is what I wanted to share today. If anybody has any questions, happy to address.